Gilliland.
First of all, it's a lot of pleasant surprises to look around and see everybody here, especially you, my God. All day long, if you've ever done a show like this, all day long people text you why they can't come. And you spend all day going, oh, oh, oh. And then all of a sudden then you come out and you go, oh, 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 oh. So, anyway. I like that. First of all, I want to have fun tonight. Do you want to have fun? I'm not here to be the center of attention. I want to have some fun. I don't get to drink until after the show, so I have to have that old-fashioned kind of fun, where you just get naughty, like the level. Somewhere back there's a guy named Jack Broom, and he just got married for the third time and turned 70, so he's getting it right this time, right, Jack? For just a second, believe me, how many of you saw this show at Sons of Herman? I want to hear from you. Now see, this is what happens when they do those budget cutbacks on drug and alcohol rehab. People just go, oh, I don't remember if I saw that show before. They buy more tickets. But I appreciate it. But one of the things that really, there's two things that really mean something to me that I want to share. One, I'm so thrilled to be at the Kessler, and the idea that I've sold out the Kessler. Can you believe, guys, we sold out the Kessler? It beats sleeping with a Kardashian. Or so I'm told. But the other thing about that is, I'm such a big fan. I was actually here the night that they broke ground for this theater over 5 years ago. And then Mayor, no, I meant, to make it, turn it into, what was it? Oh God, we're already out of control. I'm telling you, this audience, you are bad. I'm telling you, I can tell. Thank God. But I was here when this was all just a dirt pit, and the then Mayor Leppert was here, and a guy I'd never met named Jeff Lyles invited me to come here. He liked my work on KURA. He had heard me doing commentaries and stuff, and I showed up, and it was 105 degrees, and I thought, my God, this is way down Davis. I mean, I hope this works, and blah, blah, blah. And then at the time I thought, on top of everything, then I've come here many, many times, and I've said many times that I think the Kessler is the premier theater in this country. For venues that are intimate, for professional, and then the acoustics and everything. And then I'm lucky to be working tonight, of course, with Graham Sinclair, who is doing the lights, and then the legendary Paul Quigg, who is the technical director. And then, I promise I'm going to get to the show, but he's introduced everybody, but I have to. Because these great guys, I went to Matt Tolentino about a year and a half ago, and I said, I've got this idea for this show, and I really want it to be, it's going to be the show you see. And Matt was at the time, I think, 27, and he was looking at me, and he thought, you know what? If you believe in that, I believe in that. So, Grandmama, I see that she's there. I just can barely see people, but once my eyes adjust, I realize you're here. So he was fantastic, and I want to introduce them again. This is the heartthrob Jewish boy from Detroit, percussionist Michael Plotkin. Son of a bass player, and so the fact that I had Mark Wilson on bass thrills me. Mark Wilson. And then, of course, the piano player is extremely important, and I really, 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 really wanted Thiago Nascimento. Not only that, but every time I say his name, I feel like I'm talking dirty in a romance language. Thiago Nascimento. Joke aside. And I have talked dirty in a Romance language, and I'm damn good at it. That's why I learned the Romance language, as anyone that I met in Columbia in this room knows. And then last but not least, really one of the legends, honestly, to be in Dallas, and I think right now, honestly, in his own right, is a legend. The remarkable, original, Dallas's own Matt Tolentino. The only other thing that I want to say before we buckle up, because my whole concept for the show is that we're time traveling. If I was just standing there going, and then I went to, it's like, I mean, this is not a bar conversation. You'll want to go to a bar after this is over. And there will be a break. So we're going to have, this is in 2 parts. The first being a little bit longer. But the first thing I thought when I walked in here is I looked up at the balcony and I thought, the last time I saw that many people hovering above me, it was after midnight and I was 11 at scout camp. See, you're really bad. I can tell you're ready to go. So I guess my question is, are you ready? You ready to do a little time travel? Then my instructions to you, with my co-captain and my flight team, is to buckle up. My room growing up, when I was about 3 years old, 3 and a half actually, what had been originally a screened porch. And when they realized I was coming, they glassed it in. So my room was on the back of the house, and it was all windows. There were 3 here, 6 there, and then the door over there was a half glass. And then my twin bed was right under what had originally been the exterior bathroom window. So I had the hot water heater in there and everything, but they kept that window open to the bathroom all the time because that way they could have the built-in gas heater in the bathroom going, and the air would come through and kind of drift down on me. So I'm really in this aquarium, and I'm not 3.5 years old. It was a nature aquarium. It was like my home now. It's just all grown up and lots and lots and lots of trees. But one night I was lying there, and something started happening that had never happened before. I started seeing in the distance these lights, like strobe lights. It was lightning, but it was strobe lighting without any thunder. Just boom, all of a sudden there'd be these lights, like at a crime scene. And then they kept getting closer and closer. And I still wasn't questioning it. But then I started looking out, and as the lights would go on like that and go off, I would see the trees start to blow over this way, and then blowing over that way, and then they're blowing like that, and it's starting to get very turbulent. And I'm thinking, as I lie in bed, should I be afraid? I mean, because after all, I'm 3.5. It's like, all this is going on. Should I be afraid? And all of a sudden, my parents from the next bedroom, they always slept with the radio going, and I hear coming from the next room this song. And it was what grew on to be the legendary Sarah Vaughan singing what had become her 1947-48 hit, Tenderly. And I'm listening to her lyrics as I'm lying there thinking, should I be afraid? And it's going, the evening breeze caressed the trees tenderly. And it goes, the trembling trees embraced the breeze tenderly. And then, so I'm thinking, she's telling me what's happening. And it's okay, it's beautiful. And then she says, your arms open wide, enclosed me inside. You took my lips, you took my love, so tenderly. And I remember lying there thinking, oh, Rawlins, you're going to love being an adult. It's gonna be so romantic. A little background here. It's 1950, this story, but the background is this. In 1936, a very handsome bass player, 31 years old, with a traveling orchestra, was on stage at Dallas's Adolphus Hotel on the Century Room bandstand. And when in walked a not quite yet 20-year-old natural blonde, imagine that in Dallas, a natural blonde, with enormous chartreuse eyes, and I might add, an heiress, getting her master's degree at 20, walked in and took a table alone. That story is a story unto itself, but let's just put it this way. They left for New York the next morning together, and he was fond of saying that she was disinherited, but he won the lotto. And he did. So now it's 14 years later, and they've got 2 children. The older sister, who will remain invisible in this room, but she will go under the table and above it periodically. And the 5-year-old son, which would be me. So John Annie Gilliland and Mary Lucy Clark Gilliland are giving a cocktail party. Now, Dad had founded the Gilliland Sextet, which was kind of the go-to orchestra for the society crowd, and he was on WRR, and he sometimes played with the symphony. Mother was book reviewer for the Dallas Morning News. She had gone on to get her Juilliard degree at Juilliard in classical piano, and she was very close friends with the director Margot Jones of the Experimental Theater. So the party now in 1950s begins in the backyard. So in the backyard, it's all draped down. Mother has done sheets that she's painted French cafe scenes on, white sheets. Eiffel Towers, the Champs-Élysées, the Arc de Triomphe, and little cafe tables, and everybody's walking around. There was no bartender, but everybody's drink was always full. The men were in jackets. The women were all in halters, or they were in straplesses. Very fitted waists, full skirts, evening sandals, loop earrings. Mother was wearing earrings that dangled with little tiny bells on the end of them. She cut her hair off in an Italian cut, and she only wore mascara and her signature Cherries in the Snow Revlon lipstick. And Mitsuko by Guerlain perfume, you who might remember. And she's walking through, and she is in this. When she threw it out, I cut it off because I knew I'd grow up and want a pocket square someday. And this is the fabric. So this 1950 party, she's wearing a halter out of this. It's fitted waist. It's Toreador pants, which are exactly what you might think, man. And then there's a fitted skirt that buttons up the front that's open with pockets, and that's what she's wearing with her sandals. And as I looked around out there, it was really quite obvious that this was a moment in time, but the real party was inside when the lights went down. I was smart enough at 5 years old to realize that if I said nothing to anyone, made no eye contact, I was invisible to them and they thought that they were inaudible to me. Wrong! So I was like this sort of stealth, this like, it was a drone. So I walk into the living room, and our house was small, but listen, the living room was 20 by 30, that's enormous. And at this end is Mother's upright piano, and then Dad's over there on the string bass, and then next to him's McClendon on drums, and then Weta Ferguson is singing Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out. Over there in that corner, I see this new playwright that's in town with Margot named Tennessee Williams, and he's holding hands with this young blonde guy from SMU who had gone on to win lots and lots of drama awards, who grew up to be Aaron Spelling. Let's text Terry! That's the reality series I want to do. But getting back to the story. I look over there then, and there's Bob Ramsey, who of course is like family friends, and you know, Bob and Neville. Neville had been Mother's frenemy, you know. She wore her hair in a platinum sort of Veronica Lake page boy, and Mother being a natural blonde, she was never a vain woman, oddly enough. She didn't have to be. She was beautiful naturally, but she was so outraged that everybody thought Neville had this natural Nordic blonde hair. When Mother said, you know, it's fried more than ham in a bistro, I mean, it's like, but there was never a root. Mother had a standing bed. I'll pay you if you can spot a root. But, you know. So anyway, Bob and Neville were family friends, and there's Bob over there, and Bob is starting to nod out. And I say, you know, Mother's passing by, and, you know, she's got her drink in her hand, her cigarette, and she's got her hand in her pocket. And I say, you know, Mother, what's wrong with Mr. Ramsey? And she turned to me and she said, well, Harrison, that's what she called me, it's my middle name. She said, Harrison, Bob's become enamored of a perfectly dreadful intoxicant called heroin, and as you can see, it just makes him an insufferable bore, and then moved on. So then I look over here, and there's Neville, his wife Neville, and Neville is flirting with one of these SMU students. And see, I thought Mother was really doing an awful lot to try to further SMU academics, because she showed so much interest in all these male SMU students, which my sister went on to explain to me went way beyond, you know, conjugating verbs. But that's a whole other show. But I look over and there's Neville, and she's with this guy, and I see them start to go off, and they're going through the dining room into the hall, and they go into the bathroom alone. And I know at 5 that that's unnatural. I mean, so I would never go, I go through the hall and around through Mother and Dad's bedroom and then into my childhood bedroom, and I get up on the bed, and I know that I'm not going to look in there and I'm going to be violating somebody who's actually going to the bathroom. You know that. There's 2 people in there. So I peek through the blinds, and at first, let me give you this background. Mother had painted the bathroom pink and had done, and all the lavatory, the toilet, the tub, everything she had painted black. And then she had painted the bathroom pink and then done these cartoon black footprints going up out of the toilet bowl over the ceiling. And we'd lie there and, you know, we'd love in the bathtub because nobody had showers then, and we loved it. So when I looked in, I thought, well, Neville was kind of like, you know, I'd been out and seen the Grauman's Chinese Theater where they, you know, see if my foot fit, and I thought the reason her legs were in the air is because she's trying to see if they fit, you know. And I thought this guy's just trying to help her see if they, you know, if they fit. And then all of a sudden I went, oh my God! And Neville turned around and made eye contact with me, and the high decibel yell that she let out, not only did it deafen neighborhood dogs, but I can only call it like a sonic boom orgasm. I think it was just a well-timed moment when she realized I was looking. So he disappeared immediately. You know how men just leave, you know. But Neville, to her credit, did retrieve her Shantung Caprice from the towel rack very quickly. And when I re-entered the party, she was nowhere to be seen. Now, a little background as I enter back into the living room party. I see Bobby Goodman coming in. Bobby Goodman was from a very, very well-known Park Cities family, meaning Highland Park then. And here's the background on what Bobby Goodman had done to me in 1949 when I was 4. My father's band played at the VFW, and of course I know you'll be shocked, I'm glad you're all seated, but they had legal gambling at the VFW in Dallas in 1949. And my father, I was still a night owl then. I loved listening to the jazz. And so Daddy would give my sister and the quarters and nickels to play the slot machines. So I'm up on a chair and I'm playing the slot machine, and I'm not kidding you, this slot machine just started vomiting nickels. I mean, just vomiting nickels. They just kept coming and they were spilling on the floor and everything. And of course, I turned, and everything, and can you imagine how thrilled I am? And all of a sudden I hear, I'm hit like that, and the chair's knocked, and I turn around and there's Bobby standing there, like all of a sudden, he's Miss America. And I'm saying, wait a minute, that's mine. And he turns to all the people. Now this is a wealthy man. Turns to all the people and says, isn't it a shame when children don't know their place? And I just remember, well, now back to the party. And here comes Bobby Goodman. Oh, yes. Mother always let me help her do her signature confection that she handed out. And it was very exotic then to have white chocolate. And the white chocolate cubes were like a half-inch cubes. And then she would dip them in bittersweet. And she would allow me to go around and pass these out about halfway, 2/3 through the party. And again, like Lord Fauntleroy or something, making no eye contact with, the plate with a napkin over it. And I saw Bobby come in, and Bobby always took more than his share, so I purposely pushed 2 of those chocolates out toward the end, kind of like those kids that play go fishing, take 2 cards, any card, and you push it up. I had it out there, and I knew he would take both of them and gobble them, at the same time. Well, he did, in which case then he went, because you see, Bobby's, I'd custom made for him. They weren't white chocolate, that was ivory soap. And all of a sudden he's going, and these guys take him and they take him out in the yard, and I can hear all the projectile vomiting going on. And I can hear him screaming, Harrison did that, that child's a monster. And in which case then I can also hear they're pouring him in a cab and sending him home. And as they're driving away, I turn to the people offering again chocolates and say, isn't it a shame when adults don't know their limit? It's 1965, and it's late at night. I was working through my way through college by working at night, helping stock the Neiman Marcus at North Park prior to North Park Center opening in 1965 in August. So this is early February, and I get off after midnight, and it's misting, and all the news report says that the temperature is just about to drop below freezing, and we're going to have one of those. But I'm also 20 years old, and I haven't eaten, and I really thought, you know what, if I stay on a major road, I'll be fine. And I start driving down Northwest Highway, you who know that, toward Love Field. Well, a little different then than now, because after you passed like Inwood, it became not rural, but there were no curbs, and it just felt very, it felt very much rural. And I was driving along, and I'm listening to the weather report, and of course it's very eerie, and it's icy, and it's starting to mist a little bit. And I'm in my brand new 64.5 Mustang, and I'm feeling pretty damn cute. But something happened, and I wasn't sure why. And at this point, you're going to have to understand that there was a lot of things that I blocked out. And considering seriously what a good memory I have, that really tells you something. Because, don't ever tell me about that fling in Guam, I'll remember. But something told me to pull over. And I pulled my car over, and I got off the shoulder, away from the thing, and then there's this big ravine. It looked like somebody had perhaps gone off the road or something. It just didn't look right. And in those days, of course, there was no way that you could possibly, call anyone when you had something like that happen. So I got out of my car and I started walking, and I went down, into the ravine and started walking, and I kind of went between some branches and things. And again, I don't remember what was motivating me. I don't know what was drawing me. But I do know that suddenly I came into just a little bit of clearing, just a little. And the way I remember in my mind is that it was a convertible. But of course that's impossible because it was icy and everything. But that's because the back windshield was so open that I could actually see clearly through the back windshield. And here's what I saw. The passenger who was a male, the driver who was a male, was sitting facing out. And there was another young man standing over him, facing him. And then on the passenger side was a woman, a blonde. She was sitting there facing out. And there were 3 young men standing over her. And then suddenly I realized there's sexual violence going on over there. And then I looked over here and I realized that the young man had on the probably 35-year-old man on his neck a knife. And all of a sudden I go, oh my God, and I don't let anybody see me, and I start backing up to get away, trying to just extract myself from this. And as I'm just almost in the clear, I come to that ravine and I hit a branch, and a little bit of the ice on the branch that was forming made a sound. And as it did, the eyes of the man holding the knife on the driver's throat made eye contact with me. God help me. I ran as fast as I could. I was very organized in my mind. I knew I've got to get my keys out of my thing. There's no way to lock the doors because we didn't have electric door locks. I got in the car. I concentrated. I put the key in the ignition. I put it in gear, and I start going forward, and I think, I'm yanking it, I'm making it, I'm getting out of here, I'm getting out of here. And then suddenly, the rear wheels began spinning, and I ended up realizing I'm going backwards, and it went into the ravine at an angle. And at that very moment, both doors opened in the car, and the rest I don't remember. I then know that what happened next is that I'm now hostage with them, and both cars are there, their car and mine. And we're at the end of Cochran Chapel Road, which is a cul-de-sac just south of Midway, south of Northwest Highway off of Midway. Very, very rural in that sense, inner city rural. And all night long, one at a time, they took turns torturing me. And again, most of that is blocked out in my mind. But I do know this, that one after another, I would look into their face and realize that this is my death might be right now. Hope for the best. There was the sadist leader, I figured out. There were the 2 young men, they were all like 18, 19, that was the 2 that were completely under his spell. And then there was the one that every time he came and pretended to be torturing me the most and violating me the most was really pulling his punches. And when we made eye contact, I knew his heart wasn't in this. And for him, I'll always be grateful. So this is the way it went. And now it's right before dawn, and I'm face down, stark naked, in a ditch in frozen mud. I don't know why they left, but I could hear them leaving, and it took me a while to believe they were actually gone. And then when I realized they were actually gone, I lifted my face, and as I did, I could hear the ice crack as I lifted my face. And I listened, and I realized they are gone, and that's when I started laughing. I went, and I stood up, best I could, and here's what I said to myself. Verbatim. The damage done to you is more psychological than physical. The harm that's been done to you will pass. This has happened to you as an adult. You can process it as an adult. You have a choice of either being ruined or harmed. And then as I stood there and realized I have nothing to wear and I'm going to have to go and try to find help, and I'm also, of course, suffering exposure and a lot of other things. And I remembered something that former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt had written in her pretty remarkable autobiography. And as the son of feminists, I had read that. And she said, "No one can humiliate you without your consent." And I thought, well, here's the chance to prove it. So I started walking down Cochran Chapel Road, and I finally found a little piece of scrap of something like a loincloth, And I see, and the name of course has changed, but it said Par. And I frantically rang the intercom, and a woman's voice finally came on. It's right at dawn. It's not dawn yet, but it's cracking. And the woman's voice came on. She said, "Who are you? Get away from here. You don't belong here. What are you doing here? I'm going to call the police." And I said, "Please call the police. I'm desperately. Can you just bring me a blanket, please? I need help. I've been abducted and harmed all night, and tortured all night. Please help me." And of course, she absolutely refused. So I know at this point that the police came. I don't remember this, but this is obviously what happened. The police came. I gave them the thing. They took me to my house, and that afternoon they called me and asked me to come down to do the lineup. And here's what had happened. The men had stolen the keys to my Mustang, and it had on it a big round disc of silver from Mexico with a malachite Mexican head on it. It was a very stylized, very recognizable. And they had taken that, and apparently had taken that and put their keys on it because they were stopped on Inwood at Lemon by the police, and Dallas was a small enough town in those days that the alert police recognized that, and now I'm down there. What makes this interesting at this point is that I'm meeting Police Chief Jesse Curry, and I'm also meeting the captain of homicide, Will Fritz, both of whom are quite famous from the Kennedy assassination. And this was happening not that long after, and with the Warren report and everything else. So all of a sudden, I'm meeting these people. I remember Jesse Curry asking me in front of Will Fritz, "How did you pick them out?" Every time they changed their appearance, they changed their looks. They came from wealthy families. They went to Thomas Jefferson. They were North Dallas, white, rich kids. And they absolutely had the best lawyers. And believe me, they disguised them to look like everything from Quasimodo to King Tut. But I picked them out. And he asked me, he said, "How could you pick them out like that?" And I said, "You know what? I spent all night long looking into their eyes one at a time, over and over and over again. They can change the hair, they can change the clothes, but they can't change the eyes. I know who those people are." Now, I realized that later on I'm being introduced to what became the legendary Henry Wade, the district attorney of Dallas. And here's about Henry Wade as we get to the trial. Henry Wade told me that if I didn't testify against these guys, they were going to go free. And I said, "Well, how is that possible? She was, violated and violently all night long, and her companion was murdered." And he said, "Well, she's a rape victim." And I said, "Well, who isn't?" And he said, "But she's a woman. She was really raped." So I realized I've got to drop out of college. I'm underage, under 21, so it was in the paper every day, but my name was never used. I'd come home, my father had no earthly idea I was going through this. And then what was set up then was the trial, and here's the trial. At the trial, Henry Wade had told me, I want you to wear a dark suit when you come to testify. Well, the testifying was in the summer, and I was not a rich boy who had a lot of wardrobe, and besides that, damn it, if I'm going to sit on the witness stand all day long in a capital murder trial at 20 years old, I want to feel handsome. I want to feel like me. I want to feel confident. And I had this mint green linen suit, and I liked it. So I show up in the mint green linen suit, and the first thing Henry Wade says to me, which I thought was like a remark on my wardrobe choice, he said, "You didn't tell me you were homosexual." And I said, "Why did you say that?" And then all of a sudden now, I'm on the witness stand. The entire time I was on the witness stand for Henry Wade, I don't remember much about it, because what was there to remember? He absolutely just walked linear through the events and so forth and so on. And there was nothing really memorable about that, except that it was, of course, a very difficult thing to relive. But I want to tell you about the cross-examination, because the second day was the cross-examination, and I had that same mint green linen suit, HIS from Reynolds Penland, $65. I had it in blue, and I show up now in blue. Pale blue. It's summer, folks. So I'm on the witness stand now, and here's the first thing that the defense attorney says to me. He says, "Mr. Gilliland, are you a homosexual?" And I said to him, "Why are you asking me that?" And he said, "Because we intend to show that all the things you've accused these good young men from fine families of doing is completely untrue. That anything that happened between you and them was them perhaps overreacting to your having made that look at them at the corner of Inwood and Northwest Highway when you made clear from your look in your eyes your perverted desires." And I looked over at them and then back and at the jury, and I said, "Who could desire them?" And then he said, "Mr. Gilliland, do you know the definition of fellatio?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Mr. Gilliland, will you turn to the jury and tell them the definition of fellatio?" And I turned to the jury and said, "Fellatio is a pasta larger than linguine but smaller than lasagna." When the drill was over that day, my cross-examination, I was free to go. And I thought, I'm not doing any more. I've done my part. It was the end of the day, so we could exit the front. And here's what happened. Before I tell you, I can tell you this, that as a result of all of that, for 4 years I never let anyone touch me, which I think is kind of sad because, I was like 20 to 24 and damn cute. I never thought about it for 10 years. I blocked it out. It only started coming back to me at 30, that I'd been through that, for you who've been the victim of sexual violence. And I happened to see one of them in a 7-Eleven about a year and a half later, and I grew a beard to disguise myself. And my parents died never knowing that that had been me. In fact, my sister didn't know that for decades. I think probably I was in my 40s when she found out. But here's what I said as I left that courtroom. I'll never forget, because I just panoramaed and looked. I wanted to take it in and remember. And I said to myself, well, Rawlins, you're now an adult. You always wanted to be an adult, you're now an adult, but you never really believed that all adult adventures would be romantic. But please be proud of how beautifully you handled this. And make note that somehow it tells you that your life is interesting. It validates you in such an odd way. And although no one will ever envy you having endured this grotesque episode, it tells you that however gruesome the ordeal, even this brutally adult adventure was fascinating. Oh, 1968. I was finally out of college after 6 years of trying not to go to Vietnam, because they didn't send you to Vietnam if you were in college or if you impregnated somebody. And meanwhile, then, after 6 years of doing that and finally scraping together and getting a sort of quasi-degree, I was actually branded a 4F, I think it's called, because I bled. I've never bled before or since. My nose bled the entire time I was going through the Selective Service draft thing. Can you believe it? I was standing there in my underwear just bleeding! And they said, he's a free bleeder. I've never had that happen again before. The stigmata. It was biblical. So I got on a train, I'm going to New York. I'm free, I'm out of college, I'm not going to Vietnam. Woo! Yes. And so, what happened is, I got a job immediately at Bloomingdale's selling shirts in New York. I checked in and I got my, I'm living in the YMCA at the, it was called the Grand Central YMCA, and then I ultimately lived in the infamous Sloan House. And every night I went and danced at the Stonewall. The Stonewall, the funny thing about then, and I'm going to make this a little bit more detailed than I did before, but the funny thing about life then is that every place played the same music. It wasn't like we had silos then. So you'd go into even like the Stonewall or a gay bar, and they'd be playing Wichita Lineman by Glenn Campbell, and then you Marry Me Bill by the Fifth Dimension, and then over there there'd be Steppenwolf going Born to Be Wild, and then you'd have Stevie Wonder going For Once in My Life, but the big one that Barn on the Bayou, of course, but Clearwater, but the one that always got me and turned me into the snake coming out of the basket was Marvin Gaye's Heard It on the Grapevine. Bum, 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 bum. The problem with New York was that New York was so run down and corrupt at that point that everything, certainly any gay bar, was run by the mafia, and everybody was on the take. So it was very common. It's very funny because, like, for instance, Woodstock was actually a traveling tour, and it happened to be filmed there. It wasn't a standalone incident. And the same is true of the riots at Stonewall. They were always chopping up the jukebox. I'd be in the Stonewall, but it was primarily at the sewer. I really loved the place off of Union Square, if you know New York. It was just south of 14th Street. And it was the sewer, and that was where you'd go downstairs. But what would happen is that right in the middle of Heard It on the Grapevine, here would come, in full regalia, smelling of smoke like a slab of ribs in a hammock, here would come the New York firemen with their axes, and they'd chop up the jukebox. And then you would have these drag queens that were, checking your coats, throwing your coats out like at a rave in the mosh pits, and here would come your coat and everything. Everybody'd leave, and the mafia would have all these limousines lined up to take us to the next place. And this was New York. It was just so run down and corrupt. I loved it. So, anytime I'd go to, the Stonewall was all right, but I loved the sewer. And every time I'd be at the sewer, here'd come Warhol and his gang. And everybody thinks that's very impressive now, but the truth is, it wasn't history then. And here comes Warhol and his gang. First of all, none of them were attractive. Joe D'Alessandro was, but I only saw him once. Baby Jane Holzer looked good maybe once, but once she got strung out on, cocaine and heroin, picky. They were loud, they were in a bubble, they only interacted with each other, they had no interest in anyone else, they were just very, very vulgar and very loud and very self-important, and everybody hated them. One night, New Year's Eve, going back, when I left for New York, Mother gave me 4 pills, and she said, take these, they'll take the edge off when you go for a job interview. Well, I knew that Mother had never met she'd never met a legal drug that she didn't find charming. And so I just really took at arm's length the idea that I'm actually going to take one of these pills, in the daytime. But it's New Year's Eve, and my friend John Ibsen and I say, listen, let's take one of these and we'll go. So we took the pill, and we neither one of us were really drinkers. Who could afford to drink, for God's sakes? I keep asking people that now. Nobody gives me a good answer. And so we're now getting off of the subway right there at Union Square. And as we get off, it's there, and you've got the clock tower, and it just says, like 20 after 11. We're timing it perfectly. And all of a sudden, as we're walking across in the light snow, it couldn't be more idyllic. This pill is kicking in, and he and I are going, ooh. And then all of a sudden, bam, our knees went out from under us. And both of us now were absolutely immobilized from the waist down. In which case we start crawling through the snow. And thank God then, because it was corrupt, they didn't have like locked vestibules in the buildings. So we crawl in, and we're covered in melting snow, and we're huddled over in the corner, and we can see it when it turns midnight. So that's how 68 turned to 69 on me. I phoned Mother the next day, and I said, damn it, Mother, what the hell was that? And she said it was Misoline. Well, I immediately went to the library and looked up Misoline, and it was for psychomotor epilepsy. I had a hangover for 3 days, missed work. My legs just shook for days. Well, the time finally came that it was time to go back to Dallas. It was going to be my 24th birthday in April, and in March at the end of March, I decided to go back to Dallas. There was some guy that worked with me at Bloomingdale's. He was so cute and sweet, and he lived in the Queens, and he brought his car, and he was just, they all had those wonderful accents then, those, bad boy accents, And as I was getting on the plane at LaGuardia to fly back to Dallas, he gave me a joint, marijuana joint. Mine wasn't much of a smoker or anything like that, but anyway, I put it in my cigarette thing, because he'd also given me some cigarettes, because with him, I always liked smoking. But I get on the plane, and the plane flies from New York to Washington, and then from Washington to Dallas. Well, in Washington it stops, and who, may God strike me dead, sits next to me on the plane but Senator Wayne Morse of Oregon, who was a very, very big anti-Vietnam leader in the Senate. So he was kind of a hero of mine, really, but I hadn't yet become really that politicized. But I liked Wayne Morse. But he was sitting next to me, and his head was over, and he was having sleep apnea, and he'd go, So I finally thought, you know what? And I took out that joint. They turned the lights out, in the plane. After all, it's the nighttime flight, and you could smoke on a plane. And I took the joint, and I'd go like that, and then I'd go right over the senator's face and go. And he'd inhale it in, and then so finally I realized after I'd done it 3, 4, or 5 times, he was going, ooh. Oh. See? So, it was a nice thing to have done. What's with this crowd? So now I get back to Dallas, and my friends all want to do LSD. I'd never done LSD, but it was all even on the cover of Life magazine. So they said, let's do LSD, and let's go down. We're going to go down on April the 20th, 1969, my 24th birthday, to the Memorial Auditorium, which is right next to what is now the Dallas, City Hall. And it's going to be this new rock guitarist from Seattle, Jimi Hendrix. So I take the LSD, and we're all dressed up, and I go down there, and all of a sudden now I'm on LSD, and I'm down there and everything. And it turned out that my friend, who was kind of like my non-sexual lover friend, we've all had one of those, but he's a buddy of mine. And he was going with this girl named Barbara, who had had a brief tryst with Jimi Hendrix up in Seattle. So we were able to go backstage. So the very first person that I ever was introduced to, it was just a brief, fleeting moment, but still, the first time I'm ever on LSD, I'm being introduced to Jimi Hendrix. I thought, well, now there is talk about an inaugural flight. Sadly, what happened then, not in May now, things were looking good. But in May, my father now was starting to become very well known as having been a hugely successful bassist in the big band era. So he was starting to be honored now in different jazz festivals. And I felt very proud of that because my father had been a has-been really the whole time I was growing up, and he had never gotten over it. He was making $350 a week during the Depression, for God's sakes, which was a fortune, playing with top bands like Benny Goodman and everything. And then all through the 50s, he just was struggling to make a living. So I went down to San Antonio with him, and as I drove back from San Antonio, we pulled in the driveway. It was on May 31st, 1969. And as we pull in the driveway, there's all these neighbors there. And I look around, and there's just neighbors everywhere. And I said, well, what is it? And they said, everything's gone. Rawlins, everything's gone. And they said, Mr. Gillen, we saved your instruments. And they said to me, and my pet at the time was a rabbit named Wanda. And we said, well, we had to put Wanda out of her misery. She was on fire. And I said, on fire? And I looked at the house, and the house looked intact, and then I could see smoke around the windows. And I walked like a zombie up, and I went and opened the door. And when I opened the door, there was nothing there except just charred, verticals, sort of indicating where rooms had been. It was gone. It was the only home I'd ever lived in. I was 24 years old, and it's gone. Now fast forward to something that I love sharing this, actually. It happened to be on June the 28th, which actually the night of the Stonewall riots, meaning that the riots had taken place the previous night in New York, but after midnight, so it was in that morning. And now it's nighttime on the 28th of June, 1969. And I decided, I've been tipped off that they are about to demolish the house, that they're going to tear it down the next day. So I decided that I'm going to take LSD, and I'm going to go back, and I'm going to spend the night saying goodbye to my childhood home of 24 years. So I do that, and I go back. And when the drug kicked in, I just tried to relive and say everything again. I went and laid in the bathtub, and it was still black and peeling, like after Mother had done it. But it was full, of course, now of charred debris, but I just laid down in it. and pretended that I'm in the bathtub. And I picked up the melted phone and I pretended I was talking to Lynn Forless like I had the whole time I was a teenager. And then I walked through my parents' bedroom and I went back in what had been my bedroom. And I thought, you know what, it's even prettier tonight because it was always open, but now I can see straight up. I mean, you know, I can see the stars and it was a full moon. And I looked through the bathroom. There was still the frame of the bathroom when I looked through, and I could see Neville again, and I laughed. And then I lay down where my bed had been in the charred debris. And for a moment, I just lay there, and I could once again, as I watched the wind blowing the trees and feeling the breeze, I just one last time could remember what it was to have dreamed. When it was almost dawn, I walked out. I stood in the backyard and I looked at the house, the way you would say goodbye when you're leaving a funeral. And I said, you know, Rawlins, you now have no home and you really have no past. It's the only place you've ever lived, really. And here's what you've learned. When we suffer absolute loss, close friends are very close for 2 weeks. And then after 2 weeks, they begin to drift. And after a month, they think we've begun to move on. But I said to me, but Rawlins, you know that this loss, this tragedy is palpable. And the mourning indefinite. So, here's my poem to you. That rather than continue seeking solace from the empathy of others, adopt instead this approach to life's lament. That beginning now, tonight, you acknowledge what has long been true. That your constant companion, your loyal ally, the most trusted, comforting confidant shall be forever you. It's about to get dangerous. Dad was going to be honored in Chicago. It's 1971. I'd never hitchhiked and I was afraid to get in and out of cars with strangers. Duh. But I decided he couldn't afford for me to go, and I, by God, stuck out my thumb in front of the Dallas Market Center. I was so scared. And I got a job, and for 2 hours I waited, and then for $2 I got all the way to Chicago. I was hooked. Everybody was lovely. I got there. Daddy was thrilled. When I got to Chicago, he was really being honored along with a lot of really great people. And I was introduced to this one man who had buried the famous torch singer Billie Holiday, who at the time had only been dead maybe 15 years. He was an African-American man. I'm sorry I don't know his name. There's no way I've been able to figure it out. But he offered me to sit down and smoke a joint with him. And even though I really never really been crazy about, marijuana, and my father was very disapproving, I thought, you know what, I am not saying no to smoking a joint with a man that buried Billie Holiday. So I sat there and got high with him and asked him about Billie Holiday and what it was like to kiss Billie Holiday, and he's told me about Billie Holiday's breasts. I mean, it was a man conversation. And I thought, I think I'm starting to feel young. I just really honestly had not had a chance to feel young after that story I told you earlier. Gosh, I bet you wonder which story I'm alluding to. And so my father, I must say how much I loved my parents, the way they just absolutely gave me so much rope. I told my father I wanted to just hitchhike on to Toronto and Montreal, and he just gave me $60 and he gave me his blessing. I'm sure he was worried, but he never told me so, and I did. Here's what I would do when I would go now, hitchhiking into the thing, because this launched into a whole new era of my life. Anytime I would get to the town like Toronto and then Montreal, I would call the police department. I'd ask to speak to the vice squad. And when the vice people came on, I said, I know this sounds crazy, but I'm looking for the gay bar, and I know you know where it is. I'd be so grateful if you'd tell me where the gay bar is. And not one time did the vice police ever fail me. They always were nice because I was polite. So I end up at this bar in Montreal, and I meet this handsome French-Canadian director, and he directed what they called underground films, if anybody remembers those. And they weren't supposed to make any sense, and they were shorts, and they played in art theaters, and they were all senseless, and they were for stoners. You know, you'd drop acid and go, oh my God, look, it's melting, you know. So now this guy takes me on to New York. So now I'm in New York with this handsome French-Canadian. And he wants to cast me in his movie. And of course, I'm thinking this is going to be a real serious road. I don't mean Macbeth, but I did think that it was going to be more than what it was, and here's what it was. Apparently it had some pull, and if you know New York at all, Fifth Avenue, there's the New York City Library, and across the street, I think, it is Lord & Taylor. And he had gotten some sort of clearance that at 7 in the morning, for God's sakes, I was going, they had it up there, and I found myself now in a turban, in a big basket, being lowered from a window at Lord & Taylor onto the sidewalk below, where the sidewalk was covered wall to wall in lemons, and there was a mime dancing on the lemon. So I'm like lowering. And when that was over, I thought, you know, I don't know about this guy. So he was going back to Montreal, and his invitation for me to return with him was pretty lukewarm. So I decided I was going to hitchhike back to Dallas. And you know what I decided? I decided, no, I'm staying in New York. And you know what I decided to do? I was going to sleep in Central Park. I had found a wooded area called the Rambles over on the West 70s. And I thought, you know what? And here's what I said to myself. I was so proud of myself because, believe me, hitchhiking had really helped me get through my fear of strangers. For a while. And I thought to myself, all right, if you sleep in Central Park and you're killed in your sleep, you'll never know. You'll wake up dead. And then the chance of you being really killed in Central Park are pretty damn remote. So you know what? Just do it. So I would go to sleep, and by the way, the city was so run down and cheap. You know that dancers are the poorest people in anywhere. Dancers could live alone without a roommate 3 blocks from Central Park West in the 70s. I don't mean the 1970s. I mean the like 71st Street, 73rd Street, 78th Street. And a lot of them would let me shower and clean up there and everything. I was cute. But I liked to sleep in Central Park. And then at night, I'd hear the Schaefer Music Festival playing live music, and all of a sudden there'd be Billie Holiday's. I don't mean Billie Holiday, I mean Ella Fitzgerald singing, and then there'd be Sarah Vaughan, and I think, oh my God, Sarah Vaughan. And then I would hear what was going to be the legends of the future in Latin. There would be Tito Puente, there would be Celia Cruz, and then, oh my God, Hector Lavoe. If any of you have ever heard of Hector Lavoe, Google it and YouTube it. From Puerto Rico, Hector Lavoe. And when I heard that, I would just like a zombie walk toward it. I was so taken. And then all of a sudden, their second sponsor now was American Airlines. And American Airlines was announcing their new nonstop flights to Hawaii. 11 hours, nonstop, New York to Honolulu, 1971. You ready? That's 43 years ago. So this was very progressive. And I thought, you know what? I think I'll do that. And already, remember how I said you have to be your own best friend? I'd be over here going, are you crazy? How are you going to do that? And I thought, I don't know, Rollins. Figure it out. Come on. Let's figure it out. And I go, well, if anybody can do it, you can, you know. So I ended up buying a copy of the book called Steal This Book. Yes, Jerry Rubin's book, Steal This Book. It's one of the Chicago 8. That's a whole other blah, blah, blah. But I loved his ways because I thought, you know what, if you're going to be a true adventurer, you have got to be naughty. I mean, you don't have to be hurting people or doing something, but you have to be willing to take chances and really. So here's what I did. And people all my adult life have asked me how I stowed away on planes. And let me tell you something, it's never been the same way twice, but for the first time publicly, because the statute of limitations is over, I'm going to tell you how I got on that plane. First of all, I found out that it's got empty seats. That's pretty important. I now go to LaGuardia, I believe it was. I check my bag, and here's the deal. My bag was a duffel bag that's full of stuff, of course, my stuff, and it's just, the zipper had broken, and I just tied it with ropes and everything, but that was going to play into my scheme. So I put it in a locker, and then I go in the restroom, and I sit there in a stall for hours. No jokes, please. I just sat there and waited, and sure enough, just like Jerry Rubin said, a guy sets down a case with his boarding pass on it. Well, his pants are down, mine are up. Bam! I'm out of there. And then, you know, nobody knows when I walked out. He doesn't know what I look like and everything. And, of course, I immediately changed shoes because I was afraid that he was going to think I had that. He'd recognize the shoes. I go and get my bag, and now I hide. The whole time I'm hiding now behind this pillar, looking at that counter where they're checking it in for this nonstop flight. And I think, oh my God, oh, you've got to wait until the very last second. And finally somebody runs up and everything, and they put the thing down the chute and everything, and I think, and she does the last, you know how they do that? They put the chute, you know, the things right down the chute, you know, instead of checking back there. And I wait till the very last minute, and then I run, and then I fall purposely, and everything spills out. It breaks away just like the pasties on a good burlesque show. And bam! Everybody is so nice, and I'm going, oh, please help me. I've got to make this plane. I've got to make this plane. Everybody's helping me stuff all this stuff back in and tie it and everything, and they send it down and everything, and then I hand them my boarding pass, and they say, and your ticket thing, and I go, oh my God, my ticket's in the duffel bag. I mean, when it fell, everybody stuffed everything in. Oh my God, it's in the plane. And they're sitting there trying to decide what they're going to do. And here's when, I'm not proud of this. Oh yeah, I am over here. I'm not proud of this. Oh yeah, I am. I had to have a story, and here was the story. At that time, they were sending people that were in the armed services who were fighting in Vietnam, and I know Mike Pugh's out here somewhere, and he knows what I'm talking about. And they would send them for 2 weeks, what they called rest and recuperative, R&R, to Hawaii. And I said, you know, my brother is expecting his wife to be meeting him there for R&R in Honolulu, but what he doesn't realize is that his wife has run off with his best friend. And he's meanwhile been struggling with heroin, and I just know, you know, I mean, he'll kill himself if I don't get on the plane. And so they're calling everybody, and they're thinking, well, make sure that when he gets to Hawaii that he has somebody escort him, and they'll open the bag and they'll get the ticket. Okay? So all of a sudden I'm walking on to get on the plane, and I'm handing them my boarding pass, and I can hear in the distance some man going, I had a boarding pass, and all this kind of thugging. And meanwhile, I just sort of slip under the same way as if I was passing chocolates. And I sat down in the plane seat, and the stewardess, as they call them then, came up to me and said, well, you certainly look happy. And I said, oh, I am. And she said, would you like some champagne? And I said, oh, yes, I sure would. And she said, I've never seen anybody so happy. Everybody looks happy on this flight, but you look so happy. And I said, well, ma'am, I've always wanted to be an adult and have adventures. And you see, my adult adventures now are going Polynesian! Go get a drink! I'll see you on the next act. Sorry, you liquored up. wait to have some mimosas when this is over. Listen, we're going to kick off. I promise you this isn't as long as the first set, but it's full of bad stuff. You're a wonderful audience, and you're honoring me by being here, and my friends here. So you ready for another round? By God, let's take off! San Francisco, 1972. I arrived in San Francisco in 1971, actually at the end of 71. Thank God I'd had a lot of fun in Hawaii. Went to every island. Had 2 different murder attempts on me, but the usual. And I ended up stowing away on a TWA flight to San Francisco. And I arrived late fall, San Francisco. Now, San Francisco also was run down. In the early 70s, everything in this country that was a major metropolis was broke. It was actually more fun that way, but don't tell anyone I said so. So in San Francisco, I was living in the Mission District with a lot of people that I had met in college and so forth and so on. Everybody had gravitated out there. It was the second wave for San Francisco. There'd been the Haight-Ashbury thing, and now the second wave. And right behind our house, you could hear every day, you could hear Boss Skaggs and Santana rehearsing. It was magic, and I love walking to this day, so I would walk around town, and wherever you walked, anywhere on the planet Earth in late 71, 72, the soundtrack to everyone's life was Marvin Gaye's What's Going On album, the whole album. And to this day, honestly, a masterpiece. So, about Halloween, I realized I've got to get a place of my own, and I found out at this place called the Grub Steak, which is a hamburger place, down in an area off of Pine Street or whatever, that they had these rooms for rent, and it was a gay boarding house, $12 a week, and it was right there between Chinatown and Coit Tower. That would be like $20,000 a month now. It was $12 a week. But it had been, I think properly, it had been a whorehouse during the gold rush. So every room was this patinaed, people had smoked for a million years, rooms with little platforms that I assume, had once had a little feather bed on it. And everyone in the entire boarding house was gay. So you had all these characters. You had the guy in no particular order. There was the Eskimo, and that's what he called himself. He was the Eskimo who was on Thorazine. So he never spoke. He was just an Eskimo on Thorazine. But he was kind of cute, but, every now and then I'd say he just, And then there was the guy that thought he was Janis Joplin. And Janis Joplin had done the album called Pearl, so he wanted to be called Pearl, and he had the things hanging down him. I just thought he was loathsome, but I couldn't stand Janis Joplin. I'd seen her sing live a million times, and she was always sharp and drunk, and I just thought, now I'm living next door to somebody that thinks they're Janis Joplin. It was so wrong. Anyway, I had started making my living by making these t-shirts. They would be t-shirts, and I would take make faces, animal faces out of calico fabrics, like quilting fabrics, and then surround them by hand with a rickrack, and then do antique button faces, and they'd be a different thing, and I'd sell them down in the financial district. I am now 27, and that was every mother's nightmare. And every sister's nightmare too, but she still wants to be anonymous. She's here. Where is she? There she is. She's been outed. But I would sell them for $7 during the financial district. But again, I was entrepreneurial and I was doing well and everything, but not that well. But everything's relative. I could pay my rent. And other people started following suit. So now there was too many people down there that were doing these things and selling things, and so they were running us out of the financial district, and I was really struggling now to make a living. So I happened to be back at the Grub Steak again, the hamburger place where some of the guys that I knew were working, and they had a contest thing. Let me give you a little backstory here. At that point in time, John Waters, the underground filmmaker from Baltimore, his muse was Divine, the drag queen, the transvestite. And, with the head back and the eyebrows. Well, at that point, she had only made like 2 really very sort of lukewarm, sort of underground films, Mondo Trasho, I think, and something else. And, but she was now hanging all over San Francisco. And again, I'm reminding people, it's not history then, and you're just seeing her around all the time. It's just like seeing, flowers when you're at Kroger's. I mean, it's there, but, So, you have been drinking. I like this crowd. Mercy. Let's do some hymns. You can't take Chiago in here. Chiago. So anyway, there was a contest to be Divine's date to the San Francisco premiere of Pink Flamingos. And I don't remember entering myself, but I've since figured out when I read in my journal that my friend, again, the non-sexual gay lover, my friend Stephen, had entered me, and Stephen was kind of a quasi-manager of the Grapesteak. And so one night I'm at the bachelor quarters, and I get called down to the lobby, and I go down to the lobby, and there's a man down there, and you guessed it, I've won the contest. I'm going to be Divine's date to the premiere of Pink Flamingos. So, I'm not really excited about that particularly, because Divine's just Divine, but I am excited because they said that they were going to give me $125, and that way then I would be paying for everything all evening, wherever we went from, bar to bar, this or that and everything, and the limousine would pick me up and everything, and so forth and so on. Well, finally the time came. And just like clockwork, there's the limousine, Divine's in the limousine but doesn't get out, and always in that fishtail. Well, there's a punctuation. It's all right. I've got backstop. But, so anyway, they come and pick me up. And then, I just, some water or something so that I can drink, because I'll get thirsty when this story's over. So, I'm now standing there and I'm waiting, and I come out, and when they open the door and Divine sees me, it was as if you had given a rabbi a canned ham. It turns out Divine liked white trash guys with bad teeth who were flirting with meth and would abuse her. And I kind of, that one of those, sort of like, I want rough trade and everything. And of course, I'm kind of this wholesome hippie who's handsome and doesn't even drink particularly. And I'm wearing my handmade, these were what I'd wear when it's let's say, cocktail attire. These are the fabrics that I would make the t-shirts out of. So I come out and I'm wearing these. And that's not the problem. It was not another fashion thing. She just really decided she just loathed me. And so, what is that? So she wouldn't even talk to me in the car. She would only talk to me through an intermediary. And I thought, well, so it was so rude. And then really the Palace Theater was not very far from there. I mean, really, it was very close actually. And so we pull up in front of the Palace Theater, and the handler tells me she does not want anyone walking the red carpet with her, although that's not what they called it then. And you stay in the car. They'd given me the money, incidentally, the envelope with the money, because, there was no such thing as credit cards really then. And they give me that, and she's going to go in, she's going to do her thing, and then I'm welcome to come in, they said. And then, because I've won the contest, I am welcome to come back and get in the car, and then we'll go on all evening, and I'll be paying for things using this money, and blah, blah, blah. So she goes in and I'm sitting there and I wait until she gets in there and then I tiptoed through the tulips right back to North Beach with my $125 damn dollars. Yes, it was nice. Now, I love this story because this is true and this is what happens, and the guys like this story. It's because they've got this sort of testosterone trash side to them that he doesn't show when he's running the Singapore Slingers. But that's a whole other show. I've gone down and I've sewed 2 of the t-shirts down in the financial district that day, and I'm very excited. And to this day, really, I'll be 70 in April, and you can see I'm pretty full of energy. So can you imagine me at 27 or 26? You know, it's like, so I'm running up the hill. It's not on Grant Street, which is where our thing was that, you know, goes to Chinatown, but I was going in a perpendicular street, and I'm running up this hill. It was the only way to really get up that hill. It was so steep going to Coit. So I'm just running, and then as I get around the corner, seriously, I'm going... And I'm leaning over and I'm gasping as I come, but I'm on the Grant, and I lean over and my head smashes into something, and I look up and my head, my face, my nose had gone right here into Barbara Streisand's breast. There was the car, there is the thrift store, you know, the vintage clothing stores that she loved. She was making What's Up Doc. She had her hair in that sort of wonderful swept bun and things like that and everything. She was 28 years old, and let me tell you something. I'm certifiably not heterosexual, but I, for a moment, understood the appeal of smashing your nose right about here into ample breasts of a 28-year-old international superstar. I don't want to get into the nursing mother thing, but I don't know why, but particularly when I told this story at Sons of Herman, I was moved afterwards because only then did I realize how different this story is from a lot of the stories you hear. I can't tell you how lovely she was. I have just smashed right into her, and she looks right up at me, and she says, "Cute short," you know, or however she did, and tweaked my shirt. And I said, "Well, this is what I do for a living." And then, of course, I promise you, I know it's hard to believe I was boyish then, you know, and enthusiastic, but I went, well, I think I know what you do for a living, you know, I mean, you know. And I was so starstruck. She has pale, beautiful aqua eyes. I can tell by the way you're nodding, you've met her, and I don't know, she was so lovely. And she turned, here's the car, there's the entrance to the thrift store, and she turns to what apparently is her assistant handler or whatever, and says to her, "How many are on our set?" And blah, 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 and they start doing this thing, and then she turns to me and she says, "Could you make 48 of those? Could you make 48 of those?" And I said, you know, of course I'm going, "Oh yes, oh, of course I could," you know, and she said, "Well, could you make," it's like Monday afternoon, she said, "Could you make them by Friday morning?" It was Monday or Tuesday afternoon. It was going to be, I think, about a 3.5 day window. And she said, "Because I can tell you, we're going to be filming at Ghirardelli Square on Friday at around 11:30. And if you can deliver those then," she said, "you can make them any color, any sizes, any different numbers of animals, you know, that you want to. But if you can just have those, we'll have the money there for you and everything." And you can just imagine, first of all, how could I possibly have done that with the seed money if I hadn't just robbed Divine? I said, you know, many times my gay credentials have been questioned, but let me tell you something. When you've robbed an internationally known drag queen and then smashed your face into Barbara Streisand's breast, the only thing missing was me sleeping with Judy Garland while Elton John sang, Jack Daniel or something. So I went back to the boarding house, and I just got everybody lined up. All these gay men. All of a sudden, it's gonna be a sweatshop. I mean, I'm passing out. I go down into Chinatown. I buy the T-shirts. I've got the money. I'm passing them out. I'm telling people what size to cut the rack I'm going through. I'm just absolutely running a sweatshop. Up and down, up and down, up and down. I went and scored some amphetamines. They need to sew faster. Stop smoking dope. Take these pills. Barbara's waiting. So, of course, I was afraid no one would believe me. So I take the biggest gossip in the bachelor quarters is the name of that boarding house, and the biggest gossip was Pearl. The Janis Joplin wannabe that kept lip syncing. Down on Me, or whatever the song was. So I take her with me. Now, so finally it's Friday morning. I've got all these shirts ready. I've got them all boxed up. We go to Ghirardelli Square. And this is the part that I love the most, because I didn't realize until I was telling this story how wrong this could have gone. But I show up at Ghirardelli Square, and the very first, again, I was so fresh-faced, optimistic. I'm not sitting around right now brooding every moment either. But I mean, I don't know, I was flying on faith, and I said to the guard, of course they're guarding the set and and the thing, that I was supposed to do this, and he let me through the stanchions. And then there's another guard guarding her trailer, and it's right where she said it was. And I say something to them, and they just let me through. And then there's somebody that's guarding right at the door, and they knock on the door. And when they do, the door opens, and there is the assistant. And the assistant says, I can see, incidentally, Ryan O'Neal and Barbra Streisand are actually acting way over there, and you can see them. But she says, are there 48 shirts? She's looking at the thing, and I said, yes, they are. And she said, she's not even checking it, and she hands me an envelope with $438 in it. My God. Oh, my God. And you know what I decided? I'm so ashamed. How many of you believe that? I thought, you know what? I'm going to Europe. And I'm going to tell you this much. Wait a minute. I just knew that stowing away on an international flight was going to be a little dicey. But I'd think, oh, you can do it. No. Yeah, you can do it. So I got a passport. And because my name is Rawlins Harrison Gilliland, and we won't even tell you, I did so many things that were against the law. I know you're shocked. But this is the actual journal of that trip. And here's something that I read there. It says there, despite other inevitable setbacks and disappointments in life to come, I shall rest well that I was not one more person who always thought they'd go to Europe. Instead, it would take an act of God and no less to prevent it now. Remember, it wasn't that common then. And I'm on the Lufthansa flight from LA to Amsterdam, and I won't tell how I got on that flight. There's no statute of limitations. I didn't murder anybody. I promise you. That's the next story. No. But I remember they never had like male stewards on flights, and all of a sudden I'm on this German flight, and this blonde German, I don't think they make an ugly German. I know Christiane's out there somewhere going, well, you're damn right about that. But, this guy comes up to me and in that German accent with the blue eyes and blonde hair asks me if I want some champagne. And I say, you bet I do, because you see, my adult adventures are going global. I arrive in Amsterdam, and it doesn't take me long to realize. In Amsterdam, you know, I know it's shocking because I was about to turn 28, but I'd really never drunk a beer. I'd seen enough beers at the house that I didn't really, you know. So I had my first beer in Amsterdam, and then somebody told me that thing I was smoking was heroin, and I thought, nah, I don't think so, you know. I ended up getting on, again, it was run down in those days, I went and got on the Orient Express. And it was not fancy then. So I get on the Orient Express, and it goes all the way to Istanbul. Now, I'm telling you, I'm no fool. I had read all the National Geographics all my life. And I was really, really keen on all of that. But I still was naive about Istanbul. I thought I was going to arrive, and it's going to be sand dunes and camels and things. I don't know quite why. But remember, we're talking 1973 here. So I arrive in Istanbul, and I'm just enchanted by the mosques. You know, if you've ever been there, there's the Blue Mosque, which is the most beautiful, sacred blue mosque. And I thought there is no way to show my respect for the Muslim religion than to seduce a man beneath the major minaret at the sacred Blue Mosque. I thought, you know, God, I mean, that's being a team player. And there was nothing in any of the guidebooks to indicate that this was a violation of some, you know, sort of strange protocol. So I had already learned at that point that I could seduce a corpse, probably. I mean, I just had gotten pretty good at it. You know, I was making up for lost time. Remember, I went 4 years without letting anybody touch me. Give me a break here. So everything went fine, you know, and it was that cigarette moment, you know, beneath the minaret. But unfortunately, when we were walking back, you know, across, you know, and I was going back to the youth hostel, he was so antisocial, he jumped me from behind with a knife and tried to kill me. In which case then, I'm in a knife fight in Istanbul, and he's wrestling me down, and fortunately, the sidewalk across the street from the Blue Mosque was wooden, and the knife went into the wood, and I pinned him down. Well, under Turkish law, at that point, I don't know, because there was a language barrier, but the police came and so forth and so on, and they said, basically, what do you want to do with this guy? Do you want us to lock him up or whatever? And I said, look, I'm over here having my global adult adventures, and I showed up in Istanbul with a full set of teeth, and I've now knocked, my front tooth is knocked out. I want it replaced. I want to go to Athens. And, you know, I mean, you know, I think I need an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. So that it's arranged, and I'm taken to this dentist's office and everything, and they put me on opium. This is what they did. They put me on opium. So now I'm on opium, and it's going to be 3 days before the tooth is done. So I'm roaming around on opium, you know, in Istanbul without a tooth. And then finally the time came to go and pick up the tooth. And I did, and I'm not making this up, I promise you. They brought out a pillow. They were so proud of it, like a padded box and everything to present. They were so wonderful in Turkey. They were so ashamed that this had happened to me. And, you know, and they had made this wonderful tooth for it. And when they did it, I didn't realize that the tooth that they had made for me was out of Persian gold. And it was a beautiful tooth, and it was beautifully made, and it was installed in my mouth. And then I had to be put on opium for them to do that. And then they gave me opium, you know, like today, you know, hey, you want some more vodka than here, you know? Well, you know, in Istanbul it was opium. So now I'm on opium with a gold tooth, and I decide, don't ask me why, but I think, you know what, I'm going to a brothel. I'm feeling dangerous. I'm going to a brothel. So I find out what the deal is, and they connect me with this cab driver, and he goes, Taksim, and, you know, and turns off the lights and takes me up back alleys up the hills, because they don't want you to know where they've taken you, you know. And so finally I'm there, and I'm taken, and I go up the elevators and everything, and the doors open. And I was raised again by a flaming feminist who was raised by a suffragette. And Mother said that really prostitution should be legal, that women should be protected, it should be legal, that, you know, women should be in control, and blah, blah, blah. So, you know, I wasn't going to, like, go into some place where they're in chains and that kind of thing. They opened the door, and the minute the door opened, I realized this place is run by women. There were men and women there, but you could just tell. And so they brought all the women out, and they all pose and everything like that. And I said, I want a woman that speaks English, because, you know. So you figured out the woman, and she was lovely. And I went to the room with her, and nothing happened. I just wanted to talk. I just want to know what it's like to go to a brothel. Doesn't everybody? And so I'm in this brothel. And, you know, and there's my goat tooth, and I'm still on opium. And I'm starting to think I can speak Turkish here. But she said to me, I loved her, she was so nice, and she said, you know, you're so handsome and everything, why don't more of the guys like you come here? And I said, well, they don't really know where it is and everything. And we started talking, and I said, you know, really, honestly, you know, and she said, well, you know, really. So I said, well, you know, I'm at the youth hostel, and I'm sure there's a lot of guys there that would really love to come here. So she brought in some people and everything, and we started talking, men and women, we started talking. And before it was over, I'd swung a deal that they were going to pay me if I brought people to them. And I thought, this is great. So I went back to the youth hostel, and I started negotiating. And it was only that I would take only one a night, and sometimes two, but really one a night. And I would take them, and always I'd make sure that the women were, you know, that everybody was very respectful of the women, and everybody was happy. So the guys at the youth hostel were paying me money to take them, because I'm saying, I'm not taking you to my brothel unless you give me money. And then I'd go to the brothel, and they would give me money. It was wonderful, except then the people at the youth hostel told me that they said that I was running a sex trafficking ring. Well, I understood where they were coming from, but I thought it was a very narrow definition. Because I felt that I was really just connecting a lot of dots. But in any case, it was getting pretty close to my birthday, and my birthday was coming up, and I really had this dream to get to Athens and sleep in the Parthenon on my birthday. So they gave me a going-away party at the brothel. It was really sweet. Everybody loved me there and everything. I'd been thrown out of the youth hostel. They said that I was the antithesis of what they stood for. I thought, hell, my tooth was knocked out right in front of you here, you know. Picky. It's always picky. So they gave me the thing, and I ended up getting on to Athens. And here's what happens. When I get to Athens, I find out that Athens is in 1973 under a military dictatorship, and it's pretty humorless. And it's also like 38 degrees. And I thought, well, where do I file a grievance? How in the hell can you be in Athens and it's 38 degrees? And I want to sleep up in the Parthenon. So, of course, I went up and I went in the Parthenon during the day, and I scouted it all out and everything. And it was ice cold and everything. So I'm not proud of this. My sister hates this part of the story. I know. See, you're so bad. You're just hungry for those serious details. But I made the decision. You know what? I cannot freeze to death in the Parthenon, and unless I'm really have proper bedding, I can't stay there either. And I was walking through the Plaka, and I happened to be passing, and hanging in the street, you know, in front of this thing, was this big fur piece of like coyote pieces blanket. And I looked at that thing kind of the way off-duty soldiers would, you know, a chorus line of high-kicking tarts. So I waited, and suddenly, 1, 2, 3, I slashed it and I ran. So I ran as fast as I could, and I rolled it up inside out and hid it and everything so nobody would be able to realize that, and then I retrieved it later. And then I went back and went through the gates then the next day, which was the 19th of April, 1973. And I went through the gates legally, and then when it got dark, they would, make you leave, and they would lock up and everything. But I went and hid in the forested area on the Acropolis, and I had all of this hidden. And I waited until the lights went out, and it was very dark. And then, right about 10 minutes till midnight, when it would become my birthday, and the lights had gone out completely, I walked up, and they didn't have the scaffolding then yet. It was shortly thereafter, and I walked up, and I made my bed in the Parthenon and lay there and woke up the morning of my 28th birthday beneath a fur blanket in the Parthenon. Now, my visa was getting to where, you have a 6-month visa, and it was getting a little thin. I went to Crete and lived in a cave facing Egypt for a while, and so forth and so on, more details. And everybody said, oh, a cave, I mean, my God, and it was sandy floored, open, had a beachfront view. I don't know, it's up high looking toward Egypt. I don't know why everybody thinks it's so strange you lived in a cave, but it was time to go home. So I decided that I hitchhiked to Yugoslavia, and then I had to take the train through Yugoslavia because that was an Iron Curtain country at the time, communist country, and blah, blah, blah. So I did that, and then in Trieste, right there in Italy, I hitchhiked on to Paris. When I got to Paris, I had $7. And I still needed to get to Amsterdam, and I still, of course, needed to stow away on a plane, but I got to where I figured out how to do that, If one thing didn't work, another did. By now, I had even enhanced skills since I'd been a double agent pimp. So, and a gold tooth. So, I started sleeping in the park, and then at night, I would play Under the Bridge. The way I said, Under the Bridge at night, I would play. And they gave me money. And sometimes they gave me even more, but that's a whole other show. So, I made it back to Istanbul. And when I got, not to Istanbul, to Amsterdam. And when I got to Amsterdam, I realized I'm saying goodbye. So, by the way, it was the Watergate thing by then, and I'd been gone for 6 months, and I could see all these pictures of John Mitchell and all this, and I was really eager to find out what was going on back home with all the politics and so forth and so on, because after all, that was a very important part of what had made the San Francisco years. So at that point, I wrote this in my journal. And this is actually taken from the letter I wrote to my father, but that I reproduced in the thing. It said, years later, if I hadn't gone to Europe the first time no later than this, at the tail end of this period of my late youth, I'd have thought about it, dwelled on it, and belabored rationalizing it away every time I had a drink or wanted one. When I got back to San Francisco, I realized things were changing. I liked it, but things had changed. So I decided that what I was going to do, the first thing I did was go, and I had my one roll of film, Instamatic, if anybody remembers Instamatic, developed. And the 24 shots, only 17 came out, and I took it to this new guy that had just moved to San Francisco the previous fall, named Harvey Milk. And he and his partner Scott at Castro Camera are the ones that developed that roll. Now Harvey was very definitely very definitely the prototype Jewish Yankee. That's what he called me, the prototype Texas, whatever. But he loved looking at everybody's film, and he was fascinated by mine because he wasn't getting an awful lot of international gay vagabond pimps in there. So I got that done, and I ended up going then back to the nude commune that was 100 miles north of San Francisco outside Geyserville. It was actually called the Geysers. It's close to Cloverdale, Geyserville. Here's a little background on that. And not a lot, actually. But in 1900, it had been the epicenter chic Victorian Edwardian spa. And it was on the same fault line and destroyed by the same earthquake that had destroyed San Francisco in 1906. So therefore, what you had was all this natural steam rising, but the steam room would be like the end of the earth, like, Mad Max. And the pool would still be there, and even though the pool was now, let's say, 70 years old, there'd be a big boulder in the pool, but it was also a nude commune, and what had happened was this, that somewhere during Prohibition in the 20s, that this property had been won in a gambling game by this guy, and then his grandson is the one that owned it currently now, and his grandson really was anti-war, Vietnam and everything, and he let anyone that was AWOL or anything else, anyone that wanted to stay at the nude commune could stay for $1 a day. And I ended up loving it, and then I built a tree house. I mean, when a redwood had fallen into a California laurel, and I built a tree house, with whatever lumber I could find just lying around and things like that. So I kind of realized then, that it doesn't matter, everything's relative. People were looking at me like, well, isn't he fancy? A tree house. You got 2 votives, I've only got 1. I'm on meth. I think I'll take one of your votives. That's the way it worked, but I liked it a lot, and really, honestly, it was a nude commune, and the thing I really liked is at that point, bisexuality was considered kind of the thing to do. I mean, that was really kind of like what you were supposed to strive for as enlightenment, and I felt that it was really helpful for me to be trying to help a lot of those heterosexual men be more trendy. Let's just see. So there'd be usually 3 orgies a day, and I'd get to the point where I'd think, well, do I really want to go, I'm reading and I'm up in the treehouse, and I think, do I really want to go to the 1:30 orgy or not? It's kind of like my mother was Catholic. It was about, do I want to go to early or late Mass, Isn't that an unfortunate comparison? It's a good thing we have a new Pope. But I did like it. I didn't really like orgies because after a while it's kind of like going, I mean, when you go to a lot of places that have buffets, you realize they got the same thing every time you go, But I did think that it was, who is over there? She is loving that. Have you ever been to an orgy? But, I mean, orgies are not my thing, but you know what? Let me tell you something. I found that was the missing link to get me over that rape episode. I liked the fact that, and it was also interesting because it was an odd form of dermabrasion. Why use a loofah? Everybody's writhing all over you, So you cannot take this audience anywhere, I'll tell you. Lord God, and it's a work night. And so finally though, and this is also true, I mean it's true. I mean, I was up in my treehouse reading. I was actually reading Charlie Chaplin's paperback book, autobiography called Memoirs of a Millionaire Tramp. And that's what I was reading. And I heard what sounded like an atomic woodpecker at the bottom of my tree, and I swear to God they had tacked an eviction notice on it. I was evicted from my tree, and the reason why God struck me dead. they were evicting everybody from the entire geysers because the guy had sold it to the state of California to make the largest geothermal plant, you know, which I think somebody told me has been closed down now because it's, again, on a fault line, you know. But we're all evicted, and they gave us no warning. I mean, it was instant eviction. So I just left with what I could. I mean, it was so Katrina. I've got nothing. So all of a sudden now, I hitchhike back into San Francisco. And when I get to San Francisco, several things happen. One, when I got to San Francisco, I realized even more that things were changing. That didn't mean it wasn't for the better in a lot of ways, but I mean, all the guys were getting regular jobs and everybody was getting kind of assimilated into the normal world. And I liked that big bohemian world I'd been in. And then the other thing that happened was that the gay culture had created itself, and the gay culture was starting to become very, in my mind, very restrictive, just like the world that I had fled. So all of a sudden, you know, there was like, instead of listening to this kind of music, there was big boom, 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 boom. Everybody looked the same. There were never any women. I'd think, can we have some women around here? And they say, oh, they'd look at me suspiciously, like, what do you want women? So I thought, well, you know, I think maybe this has run its course. And then I ended up getting some sort of a communication from my sister telling me that, unfortunately, our mother was dying. So I must tell you, at this point, I really was saying goodbye to a lot. First of all, I've left the geysers, which, all kidding aside, I really loved being there. I mean, how free did that feel? And frankly, I had such an awful image of my body, as any rape victim does. And to be living in the nude and everybody think you were normal, I was very healed by that. And then, but I was in San Francisco then, and it just wasn't the same anymore. And then on top of that, I'm hearing that Mother is terminally ill. So I remember saying my goodbye to San Francisco and then getting on a plane to go home. And here's what I have to share with you about the experience of us losing our parent. Because it's one of the few things that is a tragically unifying part of all our lives. Because unless we predecease our parents, which God forbid, then we're going to have to bury them. And it happens to be the adult adventure that any of us that are honest enough know is going to happen, and the one that none of us truly can bear to think will happen. I arrived in Dallas. It was 1973, late year. I felt like Rip Van Winkle, seriously. I had never seen anything like these. Think about it, 1973, I'd been gone 4 years, and I'm looking at these El Caminos. I'm looking at a Monte Carlo with tonneau tops on it. I'm in the elevator at Baylor Hospital, and there's a man in this houndstooth fabric that I realize is polyester. I mean, I felt like, honest to God, and of course I stood out. You know, I still looked a little bit, still had a little bit of that pimp in me, you know. But anyway, I finally get up there, and I get off on the floor, and I go, and I see Mother, of course, had since remarried, and so it said Mary Lucy Adair, and I walked through the door. And when I walked through the door, the first thing I did, of course, was smile at her, and she took a look at my mouth, and she said, Harrison, it's not cancer that's killing me, it's your 20s. And I said to her, well, you must feel like you're losing your mind. She said, well, Harrison, losing your mind's a lot harder than you think. I tried for years. And then she says, what's wrong with this picture? I've been taking Valiums for years. They've been properly prescribed by doctors. There's nothing illegal, and I'm terminal in here, and they're telling me I can't smoke, and I can't take a Valium. So basically, she was withdrawing from cigarettes and Valiums. So I did what anyone should do. I went out on the street and scored 4 Valiums for her. She had 3 weeks to live. You want her like withdrawing from Valiums and cigarettes, and I also bought her some Viceroy. So I went back to her room, and here's what happened. I sat down next to Mother, and she took 2 of the Valium, and we both lit a cigarette, and I watched her calming down. She was sweating and shaking before. And she said to me, "Before we do anything, I want you to know," and she was referring to her husband, Rick, she said, "You know the house was still in my name, the house that, that had burned down in 1969. She divorced Daddy in 65. She said it was still in my name, and I had told you and your father that you could live in that house as long as you wanted. I wanted nothing from your father. I loved him, I just wasn't in love with him anymore, and I wanted to move on. But," she said, "he heavily insured it." And I said to her, "Are you telling me that you think Reeks burned down our house?" And she said, "I've often accused him of it." And I said, "I'll kill him." And she said, "I'd rather you didn't." So we settle in now, and she knows that she really honestly has days, as it turns out hours. And she says to me, "Was I a terrible mother, really?" And I said, "Well, there were entirely too many men and an awful lot of pharmaceuticals." And she said to me, "Well, Harrison, I was never prescribed anything that didn't help something, and as much could be said of almost any man." And I said, "Including the priest?" And she said, "Well, let's just say he made me feel closer to God." So then the time comes, and she's fading a little bit. It's like, I can watch the escalator going down. And she said, "So what will you remember?" And I said, "Well, let me give you Mary Lucy's greatest hits." I said, "Of course, how could I ignore that when I was 7 years old and finally had the Cub Scouts over, you served them clam dip?" And she said, "What's wrong with clam dip?" I said, "Mother, Worcestershire, cream cheese, minced clams, olives, you even added capers and Angostura bitters, and served those Gentile boys matzo crackers. They had no earthly idea." And I said, "Then there was Halloween, the time that you asked me, what do you give people for trick-or-treating?" And I said, "Chocolate." So you gave every one of them, and you were so proud, you gave everyone a full bar of Baker's unsweetened chocolate. And she said, "Well, they were eating entirely too much sugar. They don't need all that sugar." I said, "Every time they bite into it, they were projectile vomiting in the front yard." My God. She didn't get it. She just somehow had a mental block about, the way children look at things. And I said, "Then the next year, you said," I said, "No chocolate." She said, "Well, so what do I give them?" I said, "Gum." "Well, I thought you'd do juicy fruit." Instead, you handed out full chiclet boxes of Chlorets, which were the chlorophyll green gum that every alcoholic chewed when they were swigging wild turkey on the job. And it turned their mouth chartreuse. And I said, that's when Miss Nancy Apple's mother hauled her to the front porch with her chartreuse mouth and said, "Mary Lucy, I've just about had it with you." And you turned to me and said, "You see, Harrison, our friend Nancy is just dressed as a witch, but her mother really is one. And I said, then there was the time when you emptied your purse on my bed in the middle of the night and asked me to call Delta Airlines and find out how far we could fly. You said, how far can a mature woman and her underage child, I was 14, but I was an underage child, fly one way? And it was to Shreveport. So we got on a plane with no money and flew to Shreveport in the middle of the night and landed at dawn with no money. And she said, Harrison, it was illegal to buy liquor by the drink cocktails in Texas, and I wanted a martini. That's a true story. That's why I've got my sister here. Then I watch her, and she's starting to fade, and I need to really let her know, seriously. So she says, so I wasn't so terrible, and I said, no, listen, I never was fooled into thinking that you were just born on earth to be our parent. Now, you're a fascinating human being I happen to know who also happened to have been my mother. And I said, you make things colorful and interesting. And she said, I never asked you to respect me, only to love me. And I said, well, I did both. Because I felt that in a world that I've seen where I've had friends tell their parents that they were gay, and parents will very commonly say, I'd rather you be dead. I mean, it happens today. And I said, you know what you did? And she said, what? And I said, you poured me a drink and toasted me and said, you know what, Harrison? I care not what path others may take, but as for me, viva heterosexuality. And that was pretty much the end of it. And I said, you know, the other thing is I learned a lot about men listening to you talking with your best friend Gwen. You know, who's 10 years younger. And she said, like what? And I said, well, I remember you telling Gwen that you really, really pitied any woman that turned 30 having never had a protracted affair with a talented lover who was otherwise worthless. But she said, I also have absolutely no interest in anyone that after 30 still favors them. And I said, you know, I got to thinking about that, and see, I'm pushing 30, I'm 28 right now, so I'm phasing them out. And she said, well, you should have long ago. You were 38 years old the day you were born. I said, but here, and then she says, Harrison, I'm really fading. So if you've got something else you want to tell me, do. But then I think you need to go. And she said, do you have anything else to tell me? And I said, yes, I do. I said, all my life I've noticed how many men think that it's clever, endearing, charming to somehow regard women as these exotic anomalies, as if they are inscrutable enigma. But I said that's really a cop-out, because what I learned by watching you and the world you created is that if a man truly watches and genuinely listens, women are very understandable. And she said, so what are you saying? And I said, well, clueless men are as common as roaches in a waterfront dive, but you did not raise another clueless male. And she said, well then I guess I can die happy. But lose the tooth. postscript. First of all, I have no way to tell you how much you've honored me by being here tonight and hanging in with me, because I did kind of draw the stories out tonight. But you know what? I may never tell these stories again. I didn't tell them for 40 years. But here's some postscripts. You ready for a little laughter here? And then I want a mimosa. In 1974, I went back and found the treehouse that I had lived in. And believe it or not, the paperback was still right where I'd left it, up in the treehouse. Isn't that amazing? Then, and I went to Mother's grave to tell her this, because right after that, Neville Dansby was found drowned in her bathtub giving herself a touch-up. She had taken some Valiums, she was drinking a martini, and she had Clairol in her hand, and the Clairol bottle was on the toilet. I know Mother heard me when I went to her grave. Then, in the Reagan era, a little not so funny, but by the time that President Clinton was reelected in the mid-90s, there wasn't one single gay friend of mine from New York, college, or San Francisco that was alive. And you'll love this one. Remember Pat Parr, who would not let me in back in when I was at the end of Cochran Chapel Road? In 1985, I found myself inscrutably being the head of personal shopping for Neiman Marcus, and my assistant, well, look at that. It's a good thing the show is over. That I saw on my secretary tell me that my next client was a new woman named Pat Parr. Well, obviously, I never, ever, ever, ever let her know. I will tell you this, and I didn't tell this at Sons of Herman, but I'm going to tell y'all, but never repeat this. Okay? Because at the Sons of Herman, the CEO of Neiman Marcus, whom I adore, was actually there. But here's what I did. For years, I overcharged her. I did great, but I overcharged her. And if it was $800, I'd charge her $1,400, and then I'd keep the $600 difference, and my secretary and I called it the Robin Hood Fund. And when a woman, 51, that was divorced by the man that she put through college, came in and was trying to get a job at Eddie Holiday, I'd deduct $600 from that dress. And my sister told me not to tell that story. But this is a saloon crowd. I spotted them. Then, in 1990, I was now the head of couture for Neiman Marcus, and they came, and we were having a personal appearance by Valentino at North Park. And the police came and asked me to leave with them, and it seems that Reeks had been murdered at home in his easy chair in a sign of the cross, 3 across, 4 down. In his Barca lounger, and it was no forced entry, so of course I was the murder suspect. But I'm here to tell you what I lie, I did not murder him. But I did say to the police, and this is one of the things when I really thought it was funny, because I really saw my sister being the big sister. Because I remember being under the lights down there, and I said, I didn't murder him, but I'm telling you, if you find out who did, please get their address and everything. And said, why is that? And I said, because I want to send them a thank you note. And I said, let me tell you something. I've been a borderline agnostic for years, and the fact that somebody murdered Reeks to me is proof there's a God. I prayed somebody would murder that man, and they did, and it wasn't me. And someday I'm going to do a show where it has a lot of these things in it, and believe me, I do know who did it, because the murder weapon is actually in the casket, but that's a whole other show. Are you going to come see that show? Now, I love this one because in 1996, I was now National Sales Director for Neiman Marcus. Marcus, and I was running late for a big holiday event. And I thought, oh my God, I still need to trim my beard. I haven't got a time before I put on my tux. And I looked in the mirror and said to myself, Rawlins, it's been 30 years. You can shave now. That was the beard I grew to hide from the murderers. And I shaved. And I can't tell you what it felt like to shave. It was as good as being at those orgies. You know, it was so therapeutic. I like this one, 1996. I'm in a limousine in New York with the president of Chanel, both Paris and New York, and we're driving on the west side of Central Park West, and we're going through the 70s, meaning, you know, the streets, the 80s, the 70s, you know. And I point to them, and I say right there is the Rambles, and I said that's where I slept 25 years ago when I used to come through New York. And of course they just laughed because they couldn't imagine that was true. And this is one of the times when I really think that I love the most about doing something like this, because I realized then, do people really think that the person you are is the only person you ever were and the only person you'll ever be? That you become, and this is another quote from Mother, she said to Gwen, her best friend, not eavesdrop, you know, she said, do not ever allow yourself to become an aging version of your former self. And then, last but not least, and actually, I should have mentioned at the beginning of that in 1976, I happened to be the third recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Master Grant as Master Poet. And it was matched by 3 different states, and I became the Master Poet of Alabama when I had never even been to Alabama. But that's a whole other show. But here's my final thing, and then let's go drink. Last year, is George Baum in here?
Yes, he is.
Yes. Because I was right down the street, at 10 Bells, and George Baum says to me, I'm going to the Oak Cliff Film Festival down at the Bishop Arts Theater to see this documentary called I Am Divine. And I thought, okay, I'll go. It was Jeffrey Schwartz's documentary about Divine, because Divine went on to become very famous doing, Hairspray and all of the others, in the 80s. And so I went, and I'm sitting with George and them, and I'm watching this, and I knew that I'd seen Divine before and everything, and I know in my heart of hearts that not everybody had, and that I'd had a lot of very unusual sort of interludes in my life, and I'm hoping the show indicates that. But I nonetheless was really watching it just like everybody else. And then, oh my God. It shows in that documentary this limousine pulling up in front of the Palace Theater with pink flamingos, and I think, I'm in that car